So welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakenings course. We are working our way through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma, and we're on volume 1 of 3. This is a digest of talks given by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche over a period of either 13 or 15 years. Every year he would take a group of students away for 3 months, anywhere from 150 to 250 people. And in that period of time, he would teach the Hinayana stage of the path, the Mahayana stage of the path, and the Vajrayana. In these 3 stages of the path, these talks over the course of those years have been digested into these 3 volumes, and we're on volume 1. And tonight, first Barry and then Michael are going to present the chapters that were assigned, chapters 6 and 7. So, Barry, take it away.
Okay, I think that worked. Oh, let me make one adjustment here. And another adjustment. Okay, well, welcome. And we're starting out with joining study and practice. As he says, the Buddhist training combines meditation and study throughout the path. Learning and comprehending basic Buddhist teachings is important as a meditation practice. I guess for some there can be a tendency to place great importance on meditation, on practice, or on study. But actually, these 2 approaches may seem like separate activities, but in fact, they're complementary and they work together. And that's an important aspect of things, and that's what we're talking about here, is joining study practice. That study alone or meditation alone can have benefits, but to really progress on the path towards eventually enlightenment requires working with both. So the importance of study or of learning is that it opens our minds to new possibilities of how to understand who we are and what the world is. That we can use our intellect to receive and contemplate teachings, and it introduces new understandings that point the way. And by the way, this is called the view. More on that later. It's important. The importance of meditation is to develop an understanding of the sense behind the words, as he says, to gain a deeper understanding, to integrate this into a genuinely experienced understanding. I think we all get that. You can have an intellectual understanding of something, but that is not the same as genuine knowledge. Like if you've never seen a large body of water, if you've never been in water deeper than a bathtub, you may read about swimming, you may watch videos about it, but the first time you actually dive in is when you know it. And what we're doing here is diving in. So study points the way, gives us a view, and meditation takes us to intuitive understanding. Now he says that the mark of practice is lessening kleshas, so neurotic thought patterns. And I think that's pretty evident that, of course, the reason we practice and meditate is to quiet the mind, to clear out some of the mental chatter and preoccupations. And quieting the mind with practice is the best way to approach the teachings. That in this way, shama or practice or meditation is good before and after study. So if we quiet our minds with meditation, then we can turn to the teachings with a quiet and open mind. You know, it's like it creates some space for the teaching. It's like getting everyone to quiet down as a presentation is about to begin. And as a matter of fact, this is why our classes follow a period of meditation, and in some cases actually include a period of meditation during the teachings. And the other thing about meditation is that it sharpens the mind. He says in here that in mindfulness practice, your concentration is a very thin, sturdy wire going through all your clouds of thoughts. And this here is a description of pure shamatha, of single pointedness, of one particular object. Although our practice here is more open, we include awareness. But in either case, simply by quieting the mind and becoming more present to what's actually going on, it sharpens the mind. In a way, you become more intelligent. So, that was the mark of practice. The mark of learning is gentleness. It is being tame and peaceful. And this kind of took me by surprise because I normally wouldn't have thought of it that way. But gentleness, it means, in one way, it means being kind to yourself. You're not going to understand or remember everything that is presented to you. That's okay. But at the same time, you don't want to treat it without respect, right? These teachings have great meaning, and so the approach here is to be open to them and take in what you take in. And John's commented on this, and I've experienced it. The first time I went through this material was about 10 years ago. I think this is the third or fourth time, and every time I find something fresh here. So relax. He says, the mark is gentleness. It is being tame and peaceful, right? So it means the approach is down to earth. And without getting distracted by expectations of some sort of achieving some blissful state or being intimidated that they're just too profound and I can't possibly understand them all. Relax, engage with the teachings with the curiosity of an open mind. He says, proper learning requires an attitude in which you are not intimidated by the presentation of Buddhism and neither too enthusiastic. So, a word about the view, which a word I used before. And the view is a way of seeing things, of how we experience the world, the attitude we bring to engaging with others and with ourselves. Now, we come into this with a view, and that view is called samsara. And the samsaric view is that things are not as they should be, that I am not as I should be, that I need to change myself or others or the world around me so that I can be happy, that I have these needs that must be satisfied, these discomforts, these dissatisfactions. In the Dharma, a different view is presented. And that view is that the world is simply as it is. That this I that needs to be fixed, that is dissatisfying, that needs to be soothed, that I, in fact, doesn't actually even exist. And it is also the view the cessation of suffering is possible. So study is where we learn the enlightened view. And meditation is where we begin to experience it. Now, he talks about how the origins of this, in a way, that this twofold system of study and practice is very old and goes back to the great institutions in India, of monasteries. And I'm not going to attempt to go there if John wants to talk about that. But it's just to say that this is a venerable approach, been used for over 1,000 years. And what he says about it is that in these places developed the educational approach called turning the three wheels: the wheel of meditation, the wheel of study, the wheel of activity. And so here's a third thing, the wheel of activity. My understanding is that what this is talking about is contemplation, right? There's study, meditation, and contemplation. But what we're talking about here in joining study and practice, that contemplation is going along with study. You study it, you contemplate it. So it is another form of intellectual pursuit, basically. Now, how to be in your life is meditation practice. How to understand your life is scholarship. So, how to be and how to understand, these is using different words here, but how to be and how to understand, this is using the heart and the mind. How to be in your life engages the heart. And how are we to be? Open-hearted, upright, alert, cheerful, fully present to every moment. How to understand your life engages the mind. A very simple example. I just said we should be upright and cheerful. What do those words mean? Does upright mean arrogant? Does cheerful mean always wearing a smile? So this is about engaging the heart and mind, and also intellect and intuition. Now, by relating to the teachings in this way, you become more engaged with others. It's not about going off by yourself and finding some wonderful, enlightened experience off, in the woods someplace. It's all about being a decent human being. And it's an essentially compassionate pursuit. Now, he mentions a threefold logic here, and there's no need to spend too much time on this, but this is a way to structure writing, to structure thoughts, anything, and that is ground, path, and fruition. Simply where you are now, where it is that you want to get to, and how you're going to get there. I want to go to Paris. Ground. Okay, got to save some money, got to set aside the time, I got to book flights and hotel, that's path. When I step off the plane, fruition. And he gives another example here. I don't think it's worth spending too much time going into that, but it can be helpful sometimes. And there have been times when I've been encouraged actually to, in a presentation to really think of it in those terms. Okay, where are you starting from? Where are you going? And how are you getting there? Now, the role of practice. Shamatha takes on new meanings here. It is practice and study and contemplation. It is mindfulness joined with study. He says the discipline of mindfulness or shamatha should combine practice and study to the fullest sense. Shamatha is not just sitting practice, it is also intellectual or study. It's an intellectual tool as well as a practical tool. So this is actually a kind of a fruitional view here. It is shamatha, and he goes on to talk about thinking dharmically and about becoming a dharmic person. And this is where you really take this on and it becomes part of who you are, how you are in the world. He says, Dharma is not once removed. You start from the immediate situation, your mind, your body, and you work with what you have. You start with sitting practice and with your pain and anxiety. That's good. That's great, he says. So the point is that it doesn't work to turn away from the messy stuff. The shamatha is about opening your eyes and taking it in, whatever it is, being present to it, seeing what is actually going on. What's actually going on in yourself, especially. Pursuing this, you may actually make a new friend yourself. Really. He says thinking dharmically does not mean you always think religious thoughts or that you become a holy man or woman or a monk or a nun. It means that you become a mindful person. So once again, it is about being present. I think in another place in this teaching, he says it's actually rather business-like. He also has spoken about being an ordinary person. Shamatha is the beginning of the beginning, and how to become a practical Buddhist shamatha practice is essential. And it remains essential throughout, the meaning of shamatha, what exactly that means, how its practice changes as you move along through the different yanas, but is never left behind. So, there's one more thing here. That, it just says we practice meditation so that our mind may be one with the Dharma. Becoming one with the Dharma means that whatever you think becomes a dharmic thought. So this is the fruitional view. You're just always there. And he says that being one with the Dharma is based on natural ethics. Natural ethics, because you're mindful, you have respect for the world as well as respect for yourself, for your mind, your body, for synchronizing your mind and body. You're mindful of the effect your actions have on others and on the environment. And by environment, I don't mean so much big environment. I mean the effect you have on your surroundings. And you have respect for joining study and practice, for synchronizing your mind and body. that natural ethics naturally arise when you become one with the Dharma, because you become mindful, you become aware of these things. And there is a strong ethical element to this. And it requires shamatha practice. And practice may require reorganizing your life. That creating a time and place to practice that really supports that practice, an environment that is uncluttered, clean, fresh, and also being mindful of how you are spending your time. And then finally, actually, this is a humdinger of a final paragraph here, but the Buddha said that, I'm reading from the text here, Dharma means taming the mind and being free from desire. Desire is anything that causes us to look for something other than what we normally perceive. In contrast, normal perception is just simple business affair. There it is. Normal perception, you see, this is what we sometimes think of as very special, enlightened perception. Normal perception, simply taking in what is. Desire is anything that causes us to look for something other than what we normally perceive. That is the need for things to be different, to fulfill some sort of something or another. He says desire is the excess baggage of mind. So in order to tame desire, the mind has to be tamed. Therefore, sitting practice is known as the practice of taming. We are taming ourselves. So, I'm going to turn this over to Michael now.
Thank you, Barry. That I'm rethinking a little bit some of what I was going to say, because that was a really good presentation about especially the importance of joining study and practice, and that with meditation practice, that we, by quieting the mind, we make ourselves available so that we're able to pay attention to our experience and able to hear what we're taught, what we read, and in such a way that it might make a difference to us. If we think of people, perhaps ourselves, who seem to go through the same kinds of experiences over and over and don't learn from them, it's usually one of two things. Either they're not making any kind of connections at all between causes and effects, behaviors and results, or they're interpreting things in such a way that they're unable to learn from their experience. And meditation practice can help us, but just by simply making us available to our actual experience, rather than our imagined experience, our dreamed experience, or a numbed experience, depending on how we work with things. So the chapter that I'm going to be talking about is Achieving Sanity Here on Earth. And it begins with some comments on intellect, the importance of intellect. But it's important to understand exactly what Trungpa Rinpoche means by intellect in this context. So he begins by saying that in order to understand Dharma, we need to develop intellect or prajna, and that this is actually the starting point of the Hinayana path. That developing prajna or intellect is something that's an ongoing part of the path. It carries through all the yanas. And so it's important, I think, to understand what he means. He says that it's prajna that enables us to discriminate dharmas. So last week we talked a little bit about different definitions of dharmas. I think there were like 10 different definitions, including dharma that we usually capitalize, or higher dharma, with the teachings of the Buddha. But that generally speaking, dharma has a lot of different meanings that generally mean things, although this also includes mental events. And it's being able to discriminate these that becomes important to us. Basically, he says there are two types of prajna, lower prajna and higher prajna. And lower prajna, he says, is just how we work with ordinary reality in a very basic way. I'm thirsty, I need water to drink. It's kind of how do we manage worldly things? It's an ordinary sense of how things work on a practical or conventional level. But higher prajna, which is how we perceive higher dharma, involves something more. The example he gives is, I need water because I'm thirsty. Why am I thirsty? Why am I nervous? And why do I need relief from my nervousness? I'm sitting here on my cushion. I'm sitting here listening to this talk, for that matter. But why am I doing that? What makes me do such a thing at all? So the higher prajna that he's talking about is, he uses the words as more psychological prajna, but it's more oriented toward knowing what we're doing and having some curiosity about that. But just on the most simply level, just being aware. So it's a more direct experience of mind, so that we're actually present with our experience. And he says what we're doing in the Hinayana, what we're trying to do is cultivate the higher level of Dharma by means of the higher level of prajna. In other words, by cultivating the higher level of prajna, we're working toward allowing ourselves to see things as they are and see ourselves as we are. That's what the higher Dharma is. And he translates prajna from the Tibetan as prajna that enables you to actually separate dharmas one from another. That's to say, as he says, you're able to distinguish dharmas or norms that exist in our everyday life. And the reason this is significant and why this is significant to understand, I think really comes clear if we look at our experience in meditation, where when we are able to practice, we settle, allow ourselves to slow down, and we take things one thing at a time, and we're simply present with whatever we experience. And when we're able to do that, when we're able to settle, when we're able to relax and let go of any kind of preoccupation about the past, or trying to jump ahead into the future and kind of working out some kind of goal-oriented project of some kind, when we're able to let all that go and simply be present, then we're able to take things one thing at a time. And we begin to see more clearly. As Barry said, we develop a quiet mind. And with a quiet mind, we have more clear seeing, more of the Vipassana experience, you could say. And we begin to understand how, in fact, much of the time we're confused because we're jumbling all kinds of things together. We're thinking about the future rather than being present. We're looking at things and appending all kinds of judgments and ideas about things, so that rather than, as Barry was saying, rather than just normal perception, we have perception that's clouded by desire, by our hopes and fears, what we either hope we'll get or what we're afraid we might not get. With the Hinayana, especially with meditation practice in the Hinayana, there's a real simplicity where we begin to let go of all of this activity. And we just, again, see things, take things one thing at a time, rather than all piled together, so that we begin to be able to discriminate, be able to see more clearly what's really going on. And this is what he says. And this is from the chapter. Because we're able to separate one factor from another completely and fully, we have an understanding as to how things work. With ordinary problems, such as washing dishes, what happens when we're not able to do this, when we become mindless, distracted, confused, again, pulling a lot of things together all at once, having difficulty discriminating our ideas from the actual things we're working with. As we'll read in other chapters, we become clumsy and awkward in our actions. So again, just settling down, relating to the pure simplicity of meditation practice in terms of just being present, allows us to separate things out and begin to see things more clearly. And as he says, that this psychological approach, by which I think it means seeing our mind in the moment, seeing ourselves as we are, seeing things as they are. This psychological approach has much more profundity than the impulsive or animal level approach. And this, goes back to, again, just kind of what we get caught up in with habitual mind or just purely functional mind. He says with this that he says there's no religion or spirituality in this purely functional approach. I'm thirsty, I want water, as opposed to looking with some awareness, some presence into our experience. So the notion of spirituality, he says, comes into the picture when we begin to relate to more than just our needs, more than just the problem at hand. And with this, he begins talking about all of the problems that come up when we get too caught up in seeking comfort, seeking security, seeking to confirm ourselves in some way. And that the more we're able to look at things with a sense of depth, with a sense of clarity, with a sense of actually being present with our experience, then more and more he says we no longer use spirituality as a means of comfort or self-confirmation. And he says with this, you can't be Buddhist you can't be a Buddhist if you think the height of living is your vacuum cleaner is working, or if you're rich enough to pay your bills, or you keep looking for different means of comfort. It's naive to approach spirituality as just another way of looking for comfort in one's life. So again, it's looking with more awareness into the situations that we're dealing with and going beyond just a comfort mentality, being able to be more open to what our experience actually is and approach our experience with more awareness and with inquisitiveness or curiosity. He says the psychological approach of actually being able to see what we're doing and what we're up to is very important. That the awareness, in other words, being able to be in our experience with some awareness. He says it's the foundation, that we need to be able to expand our intelligence further in order to reveal the higher Dharma that exists in ordinary everyday life. It's always here, always here. The question is, are we awake enough to see it? With the higher prajna of discriminating awareness knowledge, he says we're able to discriminate which parts of our being is purely seeking various subtle levels of comfort. In other words, trying to simply become attached to things in a naive, unaware way, becoming numb to our experience, being caught up in our projections of things, our dreams about things, our stories about ourselves and our stories about the world, as opposed to having the awareness of which parts of ourselves want to get into the depths of our profundity, which parts of ourselves want to truly open ourselves to ourselves. And what he then says, what the Buddha said at the very beginning is that it's very necessary for us to be intelligent about what we're doing. And that with this, he connects the Buddha's statement that we have to be intelligent about what we're doing with non-theism. And the basic idea here with non-theism, and this comes up for a good part of the chapter, but essentially the problems with theism is that we begin looking to someone or something else. We begin looking to something external that we think is going to save us, protect us, give us some comfort or security, guide us in some way. And with that, we feel that something's lacking in us, that somehow there's something that we don't have that's somehow external to us that we need to take in. And with that, it becomes increasingly difficult to truly take responsibility for ourselves in the way that the Hinayana says we can do, by simply waking up and being aware of what we're doing. Again, being able to actually see what we're doing and what we're up to is very important. So he says basically with this that we're really trying to overcome a theistic approach to life, that we can't simply trust somebody's blessing or magical power. We have to realize that whatever setup we have isn't so great, that we no longer worship our emotionalized anythings at all, that we simply can relate to our immediate psychological surroundings. Is that little example from A.A. Milne with the Christopher Robin's imaginary friend. It also reminded me of Trungpa Rinpoche really thought the movie The Ruling Class with Peter O'Toole was a great movie. And he really liked the line where, if you've seen the movie, Peter O'Toole basically is, he's either very crazy or very sane, but he thinks he's Jesus or he's God. And at one point, somebody asked him, "Why do you think why did you think you're God?" And he says, "Well, I realized when I was praying, I was just talking to myself." And that's essentially what we're talking about here: is we externalize something and become further confused because of that. And when we take a theistic approach to our lives, that we're looking, he says, looking for some kind of eternity. And that this is based on some belief that we ourselves exist as well. And as he says, the problem with the theistic approach is that we're constantly preoccupied with that, something out there, something external. And we begin to forget this, which ourselves and our fundamental capacity to be awake, to be aware, and to be present in situations. He says, we feel that we don't have to look into ourselves. But in the Hinayana, we're not depending on deities. We depend only on ourselves. We take responsibility in that sense for ourselves. And he says, if we wonder why we go about things the wrong way, we need to ask ourselves. And when we do, if we really look, again, honestly at our experience, we'll see that fundamentally, we don't want to wake up, that there are times when we prefer to sleep, which seems more enjoyable, less painful. But at a certain point, trying to just maintain that sleep, the dream, it becomes more of a burden. And with this, Barry talked a little bit about this as well. He brings up the four dharmas of Gampopa, in particular the first one, grant your blessing so that my mind may be one with the Dharma. That we really want to mix what we study in the Dharma with what we come to understand through practice so that it has an effect on us, so that it makes some impact on our lives, so that we develop a true understanding, not merely a conceptual understanding, although we'll begin with that, but an understanding that really makes a difference in terms of how we see things, how we see ourselves, and how we approach our lives altogether. And that's why he says, true Dharma is found in our lifestyle, in our pain and our pleasure. And that rather than being something external, which is, again, the problem with the theistic mindset, truth is within us constantly. So with that, begins talking about the non-theistic Dharma, or the view, the four norms of Dharma. Actually, the rest of the chapter is four main headings: view, practice, action, and result. So the first is the view. Where do we come from? And in the Hinayana, this comes back to what we studied, read about in, I think, chapter 3, about the what's sometimes called the four marks of existence, or the four seals of existence. But the first one is impermanence. And with each one, he contrasts a non-theistic with a theistic view. And basic idea of impermanence is the idea that all compounded things, all composite things are impermanent. They're changing all the time. Just as an aside, traditionally said that there are two levels of impermanence. There's coarse impermanence, which is pretty obvious to us. The weather's changing all the time. The seasons change. Our bodies are changing. That's on the level of coarse impermanence. Subtle impermanence is the fact that things actually are changing all the time in ways that we may not be able to perceive. And the real message of subtle impermanence is kind of interesting, because it really says that the things that we take to be solid and fixed are actually not static at all, but are more a process. And that it's our inability to see things as they are that we don't understand, don't perceive things as changing, less fixed than we believe that they are. In any case, the non-theistic view is that things are subject to impermanence, that everything is changing, everything is not set, fixed, or solid in the way that we typically tend to think that it is. And the theistic approach is to see the universe as oneself, as creations that are everlasting and eternal. The problem with that point of view is it leads to all kinds of confusion and attachment, because and disappointment, when things change in ways that we don't think. As he says, the reality of decaying and dying is not acknowledged, but in fact, nothing lasts. So in the end, there's nothing to hang on to and nothing to fight. And again, the problem is that our fixation on things as being permanent is a distorted view that it actually obscures our intelligence. The second one is suffering, which actually with the first noble truth of the Buddha was the truth of suffering. And there's quite a bit about that in this book, but it's about 300 pages away. But just say that the non-theistic norm is that everything is suffering. And what this comes down to is because our perception is so often clouded in ignorance that we're mistaken about ourselves and the world around us, and this leads to tremendous suffering. He says the theistic approach is based on the possibility of enjoyment. This goes back to comfort and pleasure seeking in a way that, again, clouds our intelligence, confuses us with hopes and fears of all kinds. But the point is that there's always, from the point of view of the First Noble Truth in particular, there's always suffering. And there's obviously a tremendous range in terms of what that involves. That even under the best of circumstances, what the Buddha taught is that there's always an edge of anxiety. There's always an edge of grasping and holding on and fear of losing. And that this characterizes our experience more than we're aware of because we're often numb to it. The third mark, or the third norm of the view, is egolessness. And again, the theistic view is to see ourselves as existing in some way that we're actually not. To think that we have some kind of core, unchanging, permanent, fixed, independent self. That's actually illusory. It's actually something that we create moment to moment, is what the teachings say. But the non-theistic view is that all dharmas are egoless, not ourselves, and all things that we encounter, that they're not permanent or independent. They don't have their own independent existence, that there's a constant flux of coming together and coming apart and causes and conditions, so that there isn't a solid self in things. Whereas the theistic approach, once we have this mistaken belief in a self, is to strive for, as he says, the highest level of samsara. This is spiritual materialism, where we try to fixate ourselves in such a way that we have a state of mind where it's pure pleasure. But basically, it becomes the God realm, essentially. But essentially, it's a trap. It doesn't really bring permanent happiness. Then the fourth is peace. And he says the theistic approach is to cultivate euphoria. This goes back to, again, this pursuit of some kind of permanent, fixed, created state of mind that's blissful, that leads to God realm kind of existence. But because, again, it's created, it brings us back to the first norm, the first mark of existence, impermanence. Anything that's created, anything that's compounded will eventually come apart, so that it doesn't bring true satisfaction. In the Hinayana, he says peace is the absence of pain and the absence of grasping. It's actually the absence of everything. It's a complete letting go, a complete opening up. The process of things dropping away is peace, he says. When you begin to draw away from ego hang-ups, there is peace. Because we're completely open. There's nothing to defend, nothing to, we don't look for anything other than what we're experiencing. We're able to let go in such a way that we can actually open ourselves to ourselves. And as he says, you discover at the beginning that there's blue sky. So these are the four norms of non-theistic dharma: impermanence, suffering, egolessness, and peace. And he says that these have to do with how to view reality, that this is reality, that reality is impermanent, reality is suffering, reality is egolessness, and reality ultimately is peace, when we're able to open ourselves to that. He says we've been given the suggestion to think twice. We should actually look more closely at our experience. He says at first the whole idea of egolessness and peace may be absurd, but if you think twice, it becomes a reality. And this is important. He says the idea is not to manipulate ourselves into seeing things this way. We have to think for ourselves without any help and come to see how this might be true in our experience. And this is, again, why it's so important to join study and practice. As he says, they're seen as both, all of these are seen as both possibilities and problems. With impermanence and suffering, you begin to realize that everything is marked by overwhelming suffering. With the third, you begin to realize there's no one to suffer because of egolessness, which in itself is quite a revelation, that there's no one to suffer because of egolessness. In other words, a lot of the suffering comes from our holding on to ego, trying to hold on to things, hold on to ourselves. Means we're going against the flow of impermanence, you could say. This takes care of being, he says that once we realize that there's no one to suffer, that takes care of having a grudge or being angry at somebody. And in the end, you realize that nothing exists but peace, which is vacant. I think as John said right at the beginning, or maybe it was the end of, there are elements of this talk that are really quite fruitional, and I think this is one. It's something that I think comes after a great deal of study and practice. In any case, that's the view. The view is based on these four norms of impermanence, suffering, egolessness, and peace. So then we talk about practice. What is the practice that comes out of this view? And it's meditation that transcending spirituality. And he says that any meditation practice that we might be doing, such as shamatha vipassana or mindful awareness, should transcend even the highest concept of spirituality. In other words, we're going beyond any kind of goal orientation, any idea we have of what we should or could experience, and instead learning to relate to what we actually are experiencing, free of any kind of reference point or any kind of fixed idea of what it should be. In meditation practice, and this is why in meditation practice, we're not trying to overcome or defeat anything. And we're not trying to gain any level of high achievement for the sake of pleasure. And since it transcends pleasure, it also transcends pain. Because we let go of any kind of effort or any kind of goal orientation altogether. And that's why, he says, transcending pain and developing peace are byproducts of meditation rather than an immediate aim. Because if we try to create a state of mind, if we think there's something we should be experiencing, we're still caught up in ego's game. We're still caught up in creating our ideas of things rather than actually experiencing what's actually there. Rather than really opening ourselves to ourselves, or rather than really relaxing the mind so we can just simply be in our experience. So that's, again, meditation transcending any notion of spirituality. He says in the non-theistic tradition, the fundamental sacrifice is that our particular desires, our particular style, and our particular wishes are not being bought or accepted. But beyond that, he says there's something that can be accommodated. We begin to discover our hollowness, our non-existence, which could be key, because it's a discovery free of ignorance, and it's genuine and worthwhile. It's when we really begin to open ourselves up beyond, again, our hopes and fears or any kind of fixed ideas we have about what we could or should experience. And with that, the action that comes out of this view in meditation practice is beyond the extremes of austerity and indulgence. And here he quotes Jamgon Kongtrul, that our actions should transcend austerity and indulgence. In other words, it should transcend any kind of extreme, that there's a quality of moderation and even celebration. And he talks about Buddha's words to Ananda, about taking care of the body, that we're not, again, looking for something other than how we are, who we are, things as they are, here and now, right on the spot. We're not trying to punish or indulge ourselves. And he says, we keep our discipline tight, but at the same time, we eat good food, we wear good clothes, we sleep well, and we act decently. And we do this by not trying to push ourselves to either extreme of austerity or indulgence. a middle way. It's similar to the instruction in meditation of not being too tight and not too loose. And the result of all of this, this view, practice, action, result, is we have nothing to give up. That actually everything just goes away rather than having to be given up. So the idea of giving up does not really apply. What happens is, and again, this is very fruitional. I'm not going to pretend that I'm at this point in particular, but I kind of understand. I think I understand what he means, which is that there's a real sense of completely letting go, complete surrender, so that we no longer struggle with ourselves. We're no longer trying to make ourselves different, trying to expel something from ourselves or get rid of something that we think is wrong in some way. As he says, giving up things can become simply another way of feeding the ego, and that people do this all the time. But even if you give up, even if you give them up, he says, they don't just go. Because of that, they come back. Because again, we're external, in a sense, we're externalizing what the problem is. It says, according to, there's all these temptations by forces of evil, but he says, according to Buddhism, we ourselves are the tempter. In other words, it's our own mind that's creating a temptation. And again, this is what happens when we're not able to discriminate dharmas, as we said in the beginning. We confuse what we project onto things with what things are. So that when we're able to let go, when we're able to open up, when we're able to develop prajna so that we see clearly, all these problems dissolve because they were illusory to begin with. And with this, he says, the result of non-theism is liberation, but it's not based on trying to race to heaven after our death. It's based on achieving fundamental sanity here on earth. In other words, it's sanity right here and right now. It's not somewhere else, sometime else. It's not that by becoming something else. It's by just simply learning to be with ourselves, opening ourselves to ourselves, being honest with ourselves, and being clear with ourselves. As he says, there are two ways of relating to the notion of attainment or liberation. We could enter into reality, or we could enter into a dream world. If we think Dharma comes from outside, we can't let our whole being enter into the Dharma. In other words, we're falling into a dream world. We're thinking that, again, it's something outside of us, something that we're lacking, or something that we need to be given by someone or something else. But in the case of non-theism, he says, we're simply trying to relate with ourselves. That non-theism is based on personal experience. We feel that we've actually experienced reality, the truth. We've learned how to go about opening ourselves fully and completely. That makes the whole thing very real and full. So he then just provides a very brief but very succinct review of what he said in the chapter. So to review, having developed a non-theistic view, which again is based on the four norms that we talked about, we develop a meditation practice that transcends the highest euphoria of spirituality as well as materialism. We don't approach practice from the point of view that we need to make something happen, that we need to create an experience, that we need to fix something in ourselves, but we're able to simply allow ourselves to be aware and awake. So out of that, we develop action that transcends asceticism and indulgence. We're not trying to push ourselves to be one way or the other. We're actually just being with things as they are and ourselves as they are. In other words, we practice the middle way. And the result is that we have nothing to give up. Everything just goes because we begin to see more clearly. We realize that when we're awake, that we have a choice about how we're going to be in the world. As he says, we can enter into reality or we can enter into a dream world. And he says we can repeat again and again the practice that transcends worldly concepts, the action that is beyond extremes, and with the result that obstacles remove themselves. So I think I said quite a bit, but I guess we have plenty of time for discussion and any kind of questions or comments or thoughts.
I'll contribute just a memory I have of him saying something about this, talking about how we always are trying to improve ourselves, by becoming better Buddhists or whatever it might be. He said, ego wants to be there at its own funeral. That's the problem. We want to witness our own funeral. Thank you both. Comments, questions, complaints? Philip.
So thanks, Barry, and thanks, Michael. So I was struck with this reading about how utterly reasonable everything is, how gradual, organic, natural it is, how much it avoids extremes and seeks the middle way, how things relax and let go rather than having to accomplish the same thing after some kind of long, vicious fight, for instance. Just the utter reasonableness of the whole thing struck me throughout these pages. It's very attractive.
Emily.
I just have a very basic, fundamental question. And it may just be because of my own grasping nature. But I was thinking as Michael was talking about the meaning of impermanence, because there were two different things, I think, that were said. One was the idea of things ending over, nothing there. And then also the concept of things constantly changing. So I was just wondering about that kind of dichotomy and what Michael or Barry or John or anybody else might think about that.
Your idea that you're contrasting two different things, and the idea that things change and there's nothing there. That doesn't happen according to Buddhism, because there's nothing to start with.
Right, of course.
It's just a continually changing presentation, and you can't find out what it was that changed. It's just like this flow, of this hand going across a screen, pixels. But there are these two different meanings to impermanence. And one is that cars and bodies wear out, things break down. The other is that, and that's sort of over time. But the other is that every instant, these words are appearing and disappearing, and this gesture is going across the screen, and now your attention is on the screen, and now that I mention it, it's on your bottom as you sit on the chair. Your tactile sensations appear and disappear. All of this is in the moment. That's a second version of impermanence. It's a more subtle one and less conceptual, and I think perhaps more real.
I thought, impermanence is a difficult thing to define or describe until you experience it. But one of the ways in which I think about things is that we tend to think about life as if it was, the way old-fashioned like film movies work. It's a series of still pictures, and you run it by quickly, and you get the illusion of motion. Well, we tend to think that life is actually moments. The word moment. What is a moment? When does a moment begin, end? Really, there's no such thing as a moment, right? Because life isn't like a bunch of stills put together, you know? It's always changing. Our immediate experience is always changing, always, always, always.
I was going to say the same, that the idea of things going to nothing is a trick of conceptual mind. It has to create it first in order for it to then go to nothing. So it's illusory. Illusion life. Miriam?
Yeah, something that struck me in one thing you said, Michael, around, what we're hoping to achieve is this ability to discriminate between things as they actually are, like the Dharma, versus, our projections or the things, meaning that we put on our perceptions. And it's really hard to do. Like, I'm thinking of when we have a mood, for example, it seems like all of our perceptions are tainted by that. So there is a judgment about what we're experiencing or seeing. And it's like dull or not good, or I can't stand this. Like, that's true for negative moods. For positive moods, it's again, imbued with our emotional experience at the time, it seems to me. And I find it really hard to strip down perception to its bare components without that projection or without the additional meaning that I might be putting on it, slight judgment, valence, and I'm wondering if shamatha is the method really to come down to the bare elements without putting too much of ourselves in what we're noticing around us or within us. But it seems like it would be really important, to accomplish that.
I think of it as quieting the mind, that as the mind becomes quieter and quieter and quieter, it becomes more and more possible to start to make that differentiation. Like he speaks of ordinary perception. And what that means is in the moment that something arises in your awareness, they say it's self-knowing. It's there, you become aware of it. It's after that valence happens, that emotional response starts to come, that you're starting to interpret it. What does that mean to me? How does that fit into my world? And of course, there is what's really affected by mood, by all of that. But it is possible, and it certainly is through shamatha, that you can quiet the mind. And as you do that, it becomes more natural. You become more accustomed to it. And to a greater and greater extent, you have less and less attachment to the thoughts and evaluations of things. And you begin to become more and more present of simply what is.
Yeah, I think at the moment, I know the difference. I just find it hard to come back to the bare experience. It's hard.
The answer is stop trying, relax.
Thank you.
But how many of you are able to enter that perfect meditative state where your mind becomes completely empty? And how long does it last?
Michael, you were going to say something.
I was going to say that what's traditionally said is when we first begin meditation, that we're just becoming aware of the possibility, or just becoming aware in the way that Miriam was talking about, that in fact that we begin to see that we're doing this kind of projecting, and that yes, when we're in a good mood, things, things seem light and workable and cheerful. We're in a bad mood and everything seems impossible and burdensome and whatever. And we begin to see through that a little bit. But, it begins, traditionally what's said is it begins with, moments, flashes. We have moments of insight, moments of clarity. And that if we continue with practice, these become easier to recognize and, with time become more stable. We begin to be able to, rest in those moments with more clarity. The chapters in this book on meditation are excellent, by the way. When we get to those, I think that, the chapters on shamatha and vipassana in this book are amazing, I think. So, some of this, I think, might get clearer when we get to that. But, it begins with just moments of clarity. Just as in meditation practice, we come back, where we sit with the intention of staying present in some way, either with the breath or just resting in awareness. And then we drift, we wander, and then we realize we're doing that, and we come back. And it's the same, the same thing happens in post-meditation. Every now and then we wake up, we're present, we're clear, we realize we've drifted, we've been totally caught up. And, that's where we begin. Philip wants to say something.
Sure, I just wanted to add this to Cormac, that in a way it happens all the time, right? We're thinking all the time, but between any two thoughts, there's a space. Between every two thoughts, there's a space. And we can train ourselves to focus on that space and gradually expand that space. But that potential is there always, all of the time.
So we have Kurt and Emily.
I'll jump in real quick. I just what Miriam was speaking of is that can we have that moment of clarity even within our mood? We're in a funky mood, in a good mood, and whatnot, which I can see that clouds our perception. But in the midst of all of that, to catch ourselves that this is the present moment, including the mood. That present moment doesn't necessarily have to be a clear, profound place. Can we achieve that even within a mood by bringing awareness to it and accepting that as what is in this moment? Or does a mood always throw us into a ego-based place? Just a thought.
Anybody?
I don't think it has to. I mean, it's great when you can sit down on the cushion in a mood and you have a moment of clarity. That can feel really freeing. I think, even if it's only fleeting, it can be really. It can motivate you for the next time that you're drifting off, and that's why I raised my hand, because I was going to say that to Cormac, that it's, to me, it's as much about the coming back as it is about the getting there. That the continual coming back is the exercise. That's where you really find, where I really find the meaning in it, rather than those moments, the realizing where I am and coming back.
No.
Yeah, I agree a lot. And Cormac, when you ask that, how often, how long, it's like it's a quark. It's a nanosecond. And my samsara, my bad mood or my good mood, or it's my challenge is to not grasp, to not anticipate it, not to look for it, just to be to witness it. And like, oh, there it is. Like just hearing Miriam's words brought me back. Right? It took a quark, not even a nanosecond. Now it's gone. I'd like to hold on to it, but that doesn't work. Yeah. Just grasping is something I have to get over. Thank you.
If I can ever get over it, because it's the I that is always grasping. And even if I wants to get rid of I, then that's another one. And so what he's teaching us is that it's a matter of beginning to recognize clarity, as well as recognizing ego activity, which is always in thought. Thought's always full of I-other conflict and desire, the three poisons. And we begin, as he says, to experience the openness more and more as a result of our meditation practice and study. And we begin slowly and naturally, maybe not so slowly, who knows, depends on the individual, to shift our loyalty from the grasping, ambitious goal orientation of thought to simply being here and awake. And I think that's what one of the themes of this chapter is, that this happens naturally. Ego, thought, always wants to make things happen and get stuff, achieve things. And therein lies unhappiness. But when that relaxes, more and more, here we are.
I would like to offer one other thing, and that is that there can be a tendency to think of like this wonderful state, and how could I achieve that? But it doesn't really work that way, and that it's more about just doing it, just doing the practice, and things evolve. And the other point I wanted to make is that everyone's experience is their own. We all have our own way of progressing on the path. We all have our own experiences. That's part of the nature of Buddhism, is we all find our own way. The teachings can point the way, and we can hear about others' experiences. But really, there can be a tendency to hear someone say, "Oh, wow, they achieved such and such, and you want to achieve that too." But it really doesn't work that way. We all find our own way at our own pace over however long it takes, maybe long, multiple lifetimes, or maybe, who knows?
Go on.
Do you make a distinction between ego and the self? Like they do in the Jungian studies? Because I was thinking, would self be the what experiences the now, without the thoughts? Or do you not think of that in Buddhism?
Well, Buddhism teaches that there is no unchanging, ongoing self. But each one of us has our own particular qualities and characteristics. You have blonde hair, I have none. It's like that. And we each express a particular style and quality of characters. Inevitably, inexorably, we can't help it. But at the same time, the idea of an I as a doer, as a ongoing, consistent entity is denied. It says it's an illusion. I once asked, I've told this story before, but I once asked Trungpa Rinpoche, I said, well, don't we sort of need ego, I, just to pay the bills and get through the practical exigencies of life? And he leaned forward in his chair. I was sitting on the floor with other people, and he bellowed, ego is a lie. Scared the hell out of me.
That'll teach you. Actually, ego doesn't exist. This is in a realm that gets really tricky to try to, grab a hold of and understand.
I thought he was really getting at it in this chapter. It's amazing how this is supposed to be beginning teachings. I thought it was so profound.
Oh, yeah.
And that we relax into it, really. We just keep practicing and studying and give up our ambition, and it dawns more and more. What he seems to be saying. Do you think that, Michael?
Absolutely. I also say it's always interesting if you have a chance to read one or more of these chapters more than once in the week, to read at least once right after doing a session of meditation, and to find that it will speak much more clearly sometimes. Just because we're, more settled.
Oh, Miriam.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to that, trying to make a distinction between Buddhist concepts and the self as in Jungian psychology. And I think that, even though the self is not ego in Jungian theory, it's still a psychological organizing principle, and it doesn't have characteristics as such. And I think it might get close to prajna sometimes, but there's something that we came across later in our course. It's called Yeshe, and that's like I don't know if Jung went spiritual or not, is what I'm saying. And I don't know if he went into the immaterial realm. So I'm a little confused about the higher self and the equivalent in Buddhism, but I don't think that yeah, I think yes. So the self, the way we use it, it's an illusion in Buddhism. Our sense of self as having properties, qualities, characteristics, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Mhm.
Thank you. Anybody else? We're getting very close. Oh,
Well, a final thought for Miriam is you could think of it this way in Buddhism, the higher self is no self. That's where you eventually get to. You know, the more you look, the less you find.
that's good. Yeah, there comes a point, supposedly on the path, when one realizes that there is no self. What one thought of was oneself doesn't exist. What a relief it must be. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking we'll never find out any answers.
Well, the first boomy is called great joy. That's when you finally manage to get rid of this self thing, when you realize emptiness, and it's liberation. It's being relieved of the great burden. We're pretty close to the end here. Is anyone else, Vicky or Sunny?
What impressed me in this chapter was that the desire to understand, to get somewhere, to make spiritual progress is a great burden and unhappiness.
It seems like any of the attempts to analyze or envision, oh, what is this? What would be a perfect experience? All of that is just ego screaming for attention. You know, don't pay attention to, you know, coming back and just stopping. So, no, that way, you know, I'm not getting any attention. It's like all this going in circles and analysis. Anytime it comes up, uh, is ego. And when I'm meditating and I come back, two things are happening. I'm leaving, but I'm leaving where I was, but there wasn't an I to leave, and it's just disappearing. It's just going away by itself. When you come back, and it's the blessing is that the breath is there. Wouldn't be able to come back without the breath. And it's just it's not me. It's doing it's itself. So it's just very humbling once you do finally stop and realize you're chasing your tail every time you try to analyze this. Just do it.
Shall we of cacophony. Everybody unmute yourselves and we'll do the chants together and experience the cacophony of the group. I'll put the chants up. So we'll end with a prayer for peace, and then by dedicating merit. By the blessings of the enlightened,
compassionate ones,
by the power of my
positive
actions
of
of
3 times,
my
and
prayers
prayers of
of pure
aspiration,
aspiration,
may wars,
wars,
conflicts,
epidemics, and
epidemics,
all
and
abnormalities dissolve
abnormalities
in this world.
in this world.
And may the
May the
earth,
earth
who
and
live on
all
this
who live on
earth,
this
enjoy
earth
the abundance of
enjoy the
well-being,
abundance of well-being.
and all learn to live
May all learn to
lovingly
live with each other.
By this
by this
merit,
merit, all obtain
All
omniscience.
attain omniscience.
May it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing. The stormy
The stormy waves of birth and
waves,
fate,
sickness and death, from the ocean
the
of
ocean of
samsara,
samsara,
well-being.
may all beings.
By the confidence of the golden
So the
sun,
golden
great
sun of the great east,
may the
may the
lotus
lotus
garden of
garden
the
of the
rigorous
garden
wisdom
bosom
bloom.
bloom. May the dark
Dark
ignorance of
ignorance of
sentient beings
beings
be
dispelled.
ceased.
May all beings
All beings
enjoy
enjoy
profound,
profound,
brilliant
brilliant
glory.
glory. Thank you, John, Michael,
Everybody.
Barry, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Great.
Good
Night.
evening.
Michael, Philip, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
all.
night.
Night.
Bye.
Good to see you all.
See you in the morning.
Bye.
Bye. By the way, thanks, guys. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Barry, I really enjoyed your talk. It was great.
Great, good, thanks.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What do you know? Sometimes I can come through.
No, you did. I mean, you always do, but it really